black children, they are actually fighting each other because there is a part of them that cannot stand the sight of themselves.
The First World War had begun at the start of the 20th century, and African American men were enlisted into the army, but even then, laying their lives down, for their adopted land, did not win them the respect of their comrades. They were still treated on European soil as just Africans, just blacks, in the eyes of their, white American comrades. So even soldiers coming back, and though the war had been won, but they still felt like a defeated foe. So definitely a wounded people. And Marcus Garvey's arrival was definitely an arrival that came just at the right time. It gave people hope.
The Honourable Marcus Messiah Garvey is what some people called him. Some people even went as far as calling him the Negro Moses. Just to give you a picture of what this man did, he was about action. Not just talking about what can we do to people. He wanted black people to stand up straight, raise their self-esteem, let them know that they are great people. He wanted them to do for self.
He understood that there was something called the black dollar, and basically that means that we can spend money amongst us and not have to come out of our community. And he started a newspaper called the Negro World.
Here's a man born in Jamaica at a time where the country was colonized by the British, but we have to study Marcus Garvey's upbringing before we get to his manhood, because even in his childhood, his response to colonization and the present day presence of slavery and the slave mentality of the European colonialists, his response was not like the others. He did not approve of the jobs that the Jamaicans, the black Jamaicans, were only entitled to, blacksmiths and whatsoever. So by the time he reached adulthood, he went to the University of London. He studied there, was inspired by Booker T. Washington. By the time he came to the States, this is 1916 in Harlem. A year later, he formed the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association.
And by forming the UNIA, he started a movement which was about taking people back home. When I say home, I mean Africa, the motherland.
Marcus Garvey lifted the people's spirits. He told them about uniting, that we need to unite, that black people are not united. Marcus Garvey will call a crowd of hundreds, and then it turned from hundreds to hundreds of thousands. People would listen to him. Marcus Garvey was becoming so big, he started his own newspaper, and black people would buy that newspaper, and he would invest the money that he had made back into the black community. Marcus Garvey started getting so big, he started opening different businesses, and he was getting black people jobs, employing black people. So he really made a difference. Marcus Garvey was trying to take over the world. He elected himself the president of Africa. He elected himself the president of Africa. And I tell you, when Marcus Garvey was out, he had everybody's ear. One thing people didn't realize is, because of Marcus Garvey, the FBI employed the first black agent, Agent 600, to infiltrate Marcus Garvey's camp and feed back information to the FBI.
You have to understand the symbolism of the man and the symbolism of this organization. Here came a man who formed an army, of black men calling themselves the African Legion. At that time, Africa as a continent had no leadership because of colonization. He appointed himself as the provisional African president.
Marcus Messiah Garvey planted a seed. He planted a seed in people that gave them hope, that gave them faith, that gave them strength in who they are.
Back then they would have these marches on the street, and the way they would march, the authority, when they would march down Harlem, it was like carnival. And the authority they had, like they were an army of people. They were clothed in ropes and like these army gears, like they were sergeants. And people would just look and think, wow, they had never seen black people like that. The women would dress all the same, marching down the street. The men would dress up, they would march. They had authority. Marcus Garvey gave them these titles and they carried it.
You have to understand the symbolism of this, because Africa and Afrocentricity, and as a people, black people did not have this status given to them. Yeah?
And that's a legacy that cannot be forgotten. When you've got newspapers that were translated in different languages, one black man.
Garvey's newspaper, The Negro World, was published in French, Spanish, and also English. So he was bringing a global community. He believed in restoring Africa.
When you've got people who are wearing suits, when you've got captains being appointed by an individual who had what is known as a vision, and it is utmost to carry out that vision. And yes, you know what, with every man there's going to be negative labels and tags that are going to be pointed out by people and individuals. No man is perfect, but for what he did for the people, that's something you cannot forget.
One of the things Marcus Garvey wanted to do was he wanted to show Africa for what it was before it was colour line. He wanted to return Africans, or the Negro, return him back to what Africa was, so he can realize and see what Africa was, show the pride in Africa. You know, Africa had been broken down. Africa had been seen as, you know, a third world country, poverty, and it had been looked down upon. The Africans had been taught that they never had a history. So one of the things Marcus Garvey wanted to do was show the pride in Africa. So he personally elected himself the president of the Africans, just to show that pride that the African people should have, that the Negro man should have about where he came from.
But you have to understand Marcus Garvey's symbolism. You know, he had many ideas, many programs. One of them was the Black Star Line, which though didn't become a success long term, but this was a ship that Marcus Garvey purchased for the aim of giving black people their own ship. You have to understand, in that time of racism, though they're still racist today, but in that time of segregation, black people on ships had to eat after the white people. Yeah, they had to live at quarters below deck. Here was Marcus Garvey who said, I'm going to give black people a ship to reinstill pride that they can be treated as first class. Yeah, and not only that, he intended to build the economy of the black man. Yeah, on board, they could have produce and sell raw materials, export these, so black men could find jobs.
He was teaching black people about buying shares, investing their money, and he made so much money. He was such a businessman. He decided to buy a ship, the Star Line. And what you have to realize is, back then, that was unheard of. That was absolute madness.
For me, he's personal to me because I know that after Marcus Garvey lived, the leader of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, he was a Garveyite in his day. Later on, he would form the Nation of Islam. Malcolm X's father was a Garveyite, a member of the UNIA, and Malcolm X himself, the organization he intended to build, the OAAU, was inspired by Marcus Garvey. Even movements like the Black Panther Party, and if you study the organization of them, all came and were all inspired by Marcus Garvey. So today